Good afternoon to you. It is 4:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Ben Weingarten from RealClear Investigations will talk to us about the Biden administration's use of your tax dollars to pay for Democrats in the election, Democrat operatives in the election. Details ahead. Matt Rosendale, a congressman, is with us at 5 o'clock. We talk government spying on American citizens, and you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Joe Biden doing a small press conference today alongside a Japanese leader, and he was asked about the economy and the inflation still out of control, more out of control than Wall Street even anticipated today. Here's Joe Biden.
Last month, you predicted the Federal Reserve would cut interest rates thanks to falling inflation. But today, data showed that inflation rose more than expected for the third straight month. So how concerned are you about the fight against inflation stalling? And do you stand by your prediction for a rate cut?
Well, I do stand by my prediction that before the year is out to be a rate cut. This may delay it a month or so. I'm not sure of that. We don't know what the Fed is going to do for certain. But look, we have dramatically reduced inflation from 9% down to close to 3%. We're in a situation where we're better situated than we were when we took office, where inflation was skyrocketing. And we have a plan to deal with it, whereas my opposition talks about two things. They just want to cut taxes for the wealthy and raise taxes on other people. And so I think they have no plan. Our plan is one I think is still sustainable.
All right, let's try and make sense of that if we can. Steve Moore is here, founder of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. He's on the phone. Hello, Steve.
Vince, I cannot make sense of that. You didn't tell me I was going to have to make sense of something Joe Biden said.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I know. I shouldn't spring that on you. Our mutual friend, E.J. Antoni, complains about that, too. He's like, hey, don't start with a Biden clip. I can barely think after I hear that. No, but I'll try and break down some of the things he claimed. One of them is like, oh, yeah, inflation's rising, but I'm still predicting a rate cut. That's going to happen before the end of the year. Wait a second. I thought the Federal Reserve's decision-making was independent of the president. What does it tell us if Biden is now saying outright, yeah, there's going to be a rate cut?
Well, let's back up a minute. So there was so much wrong in that statement that I'll just try to dissect some of the worst inaccuracies. First of all, he keeps saying that he took over an economy that was a disaster.
Yeah.
No, in fact, in the last 6 months of Trump's presidency, the economy grew by about 11%. And we were coming out of COVID very nicely after the catastrophic shutdowns of our economy. So all we needed to do was keep going with the policies we had. Now, Vince, we've talked about this before on your show, so I know you know the answer to this question. The inflation rate when Donald Trump left office, remember what it was?
Oh, now see, you're quizzing me. I don't know, 2.5%.
No, you're way wrong. 1.6%.
1.6. All right, there we go.
Yeah. So keep that data point in your mind.
I got it. I'm going to remember it for next time. Go ahead.
Okay, 1.6% inflation, and then 18 months later, we're at 9.2%. Thanks, Joe Biden. Wow, great job. Fantastic. Blame that on Trump. Where did the inflation come from? Again, this is obvious to most sane people. The inflation came because Biden came in and spent $4 trillion and borrowed $4 trillion, and the Fed printed $4 trillion.
Yes.
And this isn't complicated. If you spend and borrow that much money, you're going to send prices through the roof.
And he did it instantly. They came in. The first thing they did was pass a nearly $2 trillion COVID relief package that was totally unnecessary.
And by the way, and I blame Trump a little bit for this too. And I'm a Trump guy. I'm an advisor for Trump. But people forget he also passed $1 trillion spending bill right before Biden came in. And then Biden doubled down and put $2 trillion on top of that. So it was a massive spending binge by Washington. It caused inflation to go up to the highest rate since Jimmy Carter was in office. And then we started to finally see the inflation rate come down. But in the last 6 months, in fact, I just was on the phone with our good friend, E.J. Antoni, who's a real expert on this stuff. And he's telling me that if you look at the last 6 months of data, and I think he's exactly right about this, we haven't been trending to 2% inflation, which is the Fed's, that's their target rate. And I'm comfortable with 2%, although some of the liberals want to raise that to 3 to 3.5%. But now we're trending towards 4 to 5%, probably closer to 5%. That's a long way from 2%. So how in the world And by the way, look at commodity prices. They've risen 15% so far this year. Look at the gasoline price in Northern Virginia and in suburban Maryland.
Yeah.
We're looking at close to $4 a gallon. It was $2.50 a gallon when Trump left office. So show me, Vince, where's the inflation coming down? Have you been to the grocery store lately? Have you had to buy an airline ticket lately? Have you had to fill up your tank?
I literally filled up my tank this morning, and I thought, how do I talk to my wife about this? How do I explain this expenditure to her? Yes.
Yeah. So this is the thing that I find really fascinating about this narrative of the Democrats in this White House. I was writing a column on this morning that, Bill Clinton, when he was running for president, he very famously said, "I feel your pain." Remember that?
Yes.
I feel your pain. I don't know if he's a con artist or not, but it was a good line. I feel your pain. People are feeling pain now, and Biden's saying, "What pain? What's wrong with you people? Don't you understand how great we're doing
yes.
as an economy?" And people saying, "What is he talking about? What country is he living in?"
I remember in the Obama era, they used to try and spin bad economic data. They would always append a little statement on the end of the bad economic reports, and they're like, "Well, no one month is indicative of broader trends," and they try and calm you down a little bit. But I have never seen an administration quite so brazen in terms of its gaslighting about the state of the economy. The American people are giving him the lowest marks we've ever seen. And they keep insisting, the White House that is, and all of their water carriers in the media, that actually things are great right now, and the American public is just too ignorant to recognize it.
Well, to be fair, look, I'm not saying the economy's, doing really poorly. I mean, the jobs market is still pretty good. The stock market's been good. What I'm saying is that there was so much damage done in Biden's first 2 years that wages and salaries and real take-home pay of American families has not caught up. So this is a president who's telling the American people, "Gee, I've done a wonderful job," when the average family has lost $2,000 in purchasing power.
Yeah, in other words, they're poorer than they were.
They're poor. Yeah, exactly.
And on the jobs numbers, I mean, my impression has been that these jobs numbers are mostly a smokescreen, actually, because they don't measure all the people who've left the workforce. And the reality is there's a lot of double counting of part-time jobs. People are losing full-time jobs at record numbers. And now that number of credit card debt being something like $1.3 trillion, we've never been there. We've never been there. And these interest rates staying high, that means we're in for something catastrophic with the credit market.
Well, see, you don't understand, though. You're missing something very important here, Vince. Americans are racking up their credit card debt for a very good reason. And do you know what that is?
They can't afford the basics.
No, Biden has a plan, and he's going to forgive people for their credit card debt.
Yeah. I'm excited for that.
I'm only being half Felicia's here. I mean, I think they're going to start paying for people's mortgages. They're going to start people's credit card debts. What, 30 million more people can get student loans?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised.
Passing out money like it's candy.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, bribing people for votes is definitely his thing. The other piece is, like, he spent his whole career in Delaware, where he was nothing but a loyal servant of the credit card companies. He will work to make them whole no matter what. If they find themselves in financial straits, he will take advantage of Americans to enrich them. No question.
If you're someone like my beloved wife, Ann, who paid off their credit card, their student loan debt very diligently, you're a sucker. You're a fool. What'd you do that for? Didn't you know Joe Biden was going to come and forgive you for your debt? I mean, let's just put aside do we have the money to do this? Why? Why should the taxpayer be on the hook for deadbeats who don't pay back their student loans?
They shouldn't. And the reality here is it's an inversion, too, of the a lot of it is, especially on the student loan issue, it's an inversion of what the left has always claimed that they are, which is looking out for the little guy. Instead, what they're doing is they're bilking the little guy in order to pay off the Harvard law graduates' student loans. Yeah. And it's regressive in every sense.
Yeah, a quarter of the people who are getting the student loan bailout money from the taxpayers, you and me and the people listening to this show, a quarter of them have advanced degrees. How many Americans have advanced degrees? I don't think plumbers do. I don't think people who are electricians do. I don't think truck drivers do. And they have to pay more taxes for people who, as you said, get a Harvard law degree? Really?
Yeah.
That's fair?
Help me resolve at least one other incoherence from Biden's statement. During his remark, he said something about Republicans wanting to cut taxes for the rich and raise taxes for everybody else. Here's what it sounded like.
The opposition, my opposition, talks about two things. They just want to cut taxes for the wealthy and raise taxes on other people.
Do you know what he's talking about? I don't actually even know what he's talking. Like, what Republican wants to raise taxes on everybody?
No, none of us do. And the fact is, this line that they've been using for 40 years, Republicans want to cut taxes for the rich. They used to say that about Reagan, for goodness sake. Reagan rebuilt this country and our economy. What we did, and, look, this is something I'm proud of because it was Larry Kudlow and I and a couple of others who helped put this plan together for Trump. And by the way, it's one thing to argue at the time, oh, this isn't going to work. And, that's friendly debate. We say it's going to work. They say it's not going to work. And we did it anyway, and it worked. And they still want to repeal it. In other words, they're tax-free. Even though we saw record amounts of tax revenues come in, even though we imported $1 trillion of foreign capital into the United States as we cut our business tax rates so we could be more competitive. And we did that because we wanted to create more jobs here. My old boss, a guy who I still love and adore, was Dick Armey, who was the House Majority Leader. He was known for Armey's axioms. And one of his axioms is that liberals love jobs, but they hate employers. Well, you know what? You can't have a job without an employer. Yes, we reduced the taxes on the employers, the small businessmen and women, so they can hire more workers.
Yeah. Those Trump tax cuts, by the way, they're set to expire next year, right?
Some of them are. And so the Democrats want all those tax cuts to go away because, they're going to have to finance their student loan forgiveness.
Well, so in other words, if they do allow the tax cuts to lapse, in the end of 2025, they're going to raise taxes on the very people that they're pretending they're not doing that to.
Yeah, look, I want voters to be very clear about this because, look, Virginia, you reach the Virginia market in a big way. Virginia is a pivotal state. And, taxes, you couldn't have two sides. They're more diametrically opposed in conflict than on taxes. And I got to give, I guess I'm going to give a backhanded compliment to Joe Biden. He's the first Democrat that I've seen who's actually telling the American people he's going to raise their taxes. Well, I guess Walter Mondale tried that. Remember that? Walter Mondale tried to say, I'm going to raise your taxes, and then he lost 49 states. But Joe Biden is being very loud and clear about this, folks. Listen to what he's saying. I'm going to raise your taxes, and not just people who make less than $400,000, whereas what Donald Trump is saying, we're going to continue to cut taxes to make America more competitive, to compete with China and Japan and Mexico and all these other countries.
Yeah.
Well, gee, which do you think is a better program for American prosperity?
Yep, it's not raising everybody's taxes, that's for sure. Steve Moore, last one. With the inflation running as hot as it still is, meaning everything's much more expensive and people can't afford stuff. Joe Biden said today that he expects the Federal Reserve is still going to cut rates this year. If they do that in the face of an out of control economy, aren't they just trying to rig the election at that point?
I get asked this question 10 times a week. And, the question, of course, is will the Fed be political?
Yes.
And will they make decisions not based on, what's best for the country, but what's best for them? And let's face it, Jerome Powell is gone as Fed chairman if Donald Trump wins. He's made that very clear. So is he going to protect his own job? And are the people at the Fed going to, protect their own fiefdom? Or are they going to do what's right for the country? And all I can tell you, I don't know the answer to that, Vince. I can just simply tell you this. There is no case right now. There is no case whatsoever for cutting interest rates right now. I wish there were. Of course. But when you look at grocery prices, when you look at gas prices, when you look at mortgage payments, people's electric power bills, all of these things, no, there's no case for it. We're running at about 4.5% to 5% inflation. You don't cut rates into that. And by the way, Vince, I know we're coming to the end of this interview. I want to mention one quick thing, if I may, because I'm a very religious listener to your show. You mentioned the other day on your show that study about how the elites look at America very differently. They want to take away your air conditioner. They want to take away your SUV.
Yes.
They want the school unions to deal with the schools, not parents. That was the study that we did at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. And I just wanted to get that on the record. And Scott Rasmussen did that report. People should look at it because you've got a cultural elite, which is the backbone of the Democratic Party today, that is completely out of touch with real America. And folks, you want to put these people back in charge. I mean, they want to get rid of air conditioning. Of course, they're not going to give up their own air conditioners.
No.
They're going to let the little people are going to have to give up their air conditioners.
And by the way, the headline on that piece that at least that caught my attention was your survey. I didn't realize that. So credit to you and your organization for that. But that survey was that most of the elite in the country are okay with cheating to win elections. And let me just add this detail, and they're Democrats. They're perfectly comfortable with cheating to win elections.
And the other big takeaway was 70% of these cultural elite, again, the backbone of the arrogant Democratic Party, they believe that there's too much freedom in America. Too much freedom.
Yeah. No. Not at all. There's not enough. That's the answer. Hey, thank you very much. Steve Moore, thank you as always. Good to talk to you, sir.
Okay, Vince. Have a great week.
There he is, Steve Moore, religious listener to the Vince Coglianese Show. Checking. We really live in the best timeline, I have to tell you. So that interview that Biden did with Univision, I think it's the only interview he's done in months, like actual interview of any kind. It's heavily edited. They must have covered up a lot of mistakes. During the interview, Biden accused Trump of being a racist towards him. Biden said that Trump is racist towards Biden. Listen to this.
Look, one of the things going on here, all kids aside, is the way we denigrate people.
He did grow up in the Puerto Rican community, didn't he?
The way we talk about people. The way we talk about, and he's even making fun of my being an Irish Catholic. I mean, what the hell is this? It's never been like this. Never been like this. It's going to stop.
What the hell was that? He's making fun of me for being an Irish Catholic. You want to try that again? No, one take is fine. One take is fine. There we go. We've reached the Biden accuses Trump of being racist towards Biden phase of the campaign. Glad we got that out of the way early. We have a long way to go until November. Stay with us. Ben Weingarten's going to be here. Speaking of November, the Biden administration's using your money to fund Democrats and their election activities. The details ahead. 4:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Congressman Matt Rosendale joins us at 5 o'clock. We talked to him about the latest efforts in Congress to continue spying on American citizens without warrants. Is there a pushback, any meaningful pushback against that? Congressman Rosendale will explain. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The election is approaching, which means Democrat hijinks are already underway. What are they up to? And how are they using your money to do it? For more on that, Ben Weingarten joins us now. He's an editor-at-large at RealClear Investigations with an important new report today. Ben, great to talk to you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I always appreciate it.
Ben, take me on a tour through your findings. This is about how taxpayers are actually subsidizing Democrats going into the election. What does that mean?
Yeah, there are two primary ways this is occurring right now, and one of them puts what were dubbed Zuckbucks or Zuckerbucks last time on steroids. Zuckerbucks, of course, referring to the use of hundreds of millions of dollars from Mark Zuckerberg funneled down via progressive conduits to election offices around the country, which then outsourced to progressive nonprofits, third-party, purportedly nonpartisan electioneering shops, essentially outsourced critical aspects of the election and led to, of course, mass mail-in balloting totals, particularly in the jurisdictions that Joe Biden needed to win in 2020. Well, that has been put on steroids and federalized via what's been dubbed Biden Bucks, which is an executive order put forth by the administration, which pledges every single executive agency, regardless of what their actual mandate is, to go about registering voters and mobilizing voters in 2024, arguably in violation of the law and Federalist principles, which would say that the Fed shouldn't be involved at all in anything remotely resembling electioneering. And in addition to pledging every single agency under the sun to register and mobilize voters, and most of the people, of course, with whom they're interacting disproportionately tend to vote Democrat, they are also permitted and encouraged to work with purportedly nonpartisan third-party groups, just like the ones that the Zuckerbuck operation used last time around, in service of voter participation. So the left-wing groups, and in particular Demos, which was the think tank really behind this, a progressive think tank, the left-wing champions of this project think that if fully implemented, this could generate 3.5 million new or updated voters registered annually. So that's a massive, massive, what looks like Democrat get out the vote effort with your tax dollars under the guise of trying to expand the franchise and promote democracy in this country. And the second major leg of this, and you could obviously spend a whole episode just talking about Biden bucks. The second leg of this is the use of 501c3 charities to raise substantial sums of money for what also look like de facto Democrat get out the vote efforts. And this is a really interesting sort of scheme here. What Democrats have realized is that you can use progressive groups that claim nonpartisanship to go about registering and mobilizing the communities that disproportionately generate Democrat votes. And on a tax-exempt basis, they can raise funds at infinite levels from individual wealthy donors, again, tax-exempt, to fund these charities, which target for voter mobilization the very cohorts in swing states that help them win elections, as well as tapping into private foundations, which may have hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in assets at their disposal that would otherwise be barred from engaging in political activity.
Right.
They can do so via these 501c3s that claim to be nonpartisan while in reality generating Democrat votes to help Democrats win.
Let me just to make sure I understand this. But in normal politics, there are contribution limits to a candidate. So if I'm a rich guy and want to give money, there's only so much money I can give to a political party and specifically to a candidate. But if you want to really make sure that that candidate wins, you can give your money to a tax-exempt organization, meaning you get to write it off on your own taxes. And then that organization can turn around and guarantee the only people that they're going to bother registering to vote are Democrats.
That's right. In effect, that's how it happens. The IRS actually bars this behavior. If you go into the text, it says you can't engage in partisan electioneering or anything that gives the appearance of even a bias towards supporting one candidate or one party over the other. But it's abundantly clear when you look at where these groups have targeted and the populations they're targeting, and they will present it as underrepresented groups, a new American majority, single women, minorities, et cetera, all cohorts that we know tend to vote disproportionately Democrat.
They'll hide behind identity politics.
Targeting, and we've seen leaked documents showing a major Democrat super PAC saying this is the number one way to win presidential elections, is to use 501c3 putatively nonpartisan charities to funnel hundreds of millions of dollars for voter registration and mobilization into the very jurisdictions they need in the swing states. So very tactically and strategically to win.
Right. We've seen versions of this in all sorts of left-wing implementations, including, for instance, admission to higher education, where colleges are forbidden from using race, for example, for allowing to allow students in, but they'll use proxy measures to try and figure out what your race is anyway before they let you in. And so this is kind of what they're doing in electoral politics, which is they'll target areas where they know there are high densities of voters who are going to be Democrat voters anyway, then register them and do it with a lot of money flowing in and under tax-exempt status.
That's right. I think the analog is spot on between skirting restrictions on affirmative action by saying you're not going to target racial quotas, you're just going to go to the communities that are going to generate the racial quota that you already wanted. And what's perverse here, beyond obviously the idea that clearly there does seem to be a obvious partisan taint to the groups that are involved with these efforts and then the populations they're targeting, and then that it flouts the IRS, the law, at the end of the day, is that, of course, there's nothing comparable on the right. There's obviously nothing comparable on the right when it comes to Biden bucks because Republicans don't control the executive branch. But there's a chill over Republicans even thinking about doing anything like this because of the history, according to those who have studied this, of the Tea Party targeting efforts. You would not want to run afoul of the IRS in any potential way on the Republican side, but it appears the progressives operate with total impunity in this space.
They feel totally safe doing it. I saw a survey recently that actually showed that across the country, among people who are not registered to vote, their political inclinations are by and large to the benefit of Republicans, it turns out, across the country. But these organizations are not targeting those voters. They're not trying to register new voters who might accidentally vote for Trump. That's not what they want. They're looking for people who are specifically going to vote to put Biden back in office.
That's right. And there's a funny quote in the report from Mike Howell at Heritage, and he says, okay, if these are truly nonpartisan organizations and they really want to drive out the vote, then will they show up at a NASCAR race or another analogous event to that? And of course,
a gun show.
The answer is obviously not here.
Yeah.
So in many ways, you have Democrats exploiting the rules, sort of working the refs, obviously, through a reprised Zuckerbucks effort as well, because there is another Zuckerbucks 2.0 effort that's seeking to circumvent or at least avoid the states where there have been bans in around 24 states
Yes.
on the use of private funds to buy off public election offices and use them potentially towards partisan ends. But that effort continues as well.
So, all right, I did want to ask about that feature because Wisconsin, I think it was just last week, passed a constitutional amendment banning Zuckbucks. They said no more. And actually, it was brilliant what the activists on the ground did when they passed this. They ran advertising saying, don't let right-wing billionaires like Elon Musk control our elections. And so all the Wisconsin voters showed up and they voted to ban Zuckbucks, some of them unwittingly, I would imagine, which is hilarious to me. But it's great. It's great. So 28 states, according to the Capital Research Center, have now either banned outright or restricted the use of these Zuckbucks. Is the Biden administration circumventing that?
Well, I would say that they are circumventing it from the perspective of the executive order itself brings to bear the executive order on quote unquote affirmatively advancing voting, which, like with the 501c3 charity effort, also is explicitly about targeting quote unquote underrepresented voters. If $400 million is a lot of money to throw into election offices across the country in one race, but we're talking about the entirety of the federal government here, executive agencies that operate everywhere in this country and interact with millions of people at naturalization ceremonies, on college campuses where now federal work studies funds are being allowed to pay off college students to engage in voter registration and mobilization. If you're dealing with HUD, if you're dealing with food stamps, run down the list of agencies. All of those agencies are being mobilized and engaged to register and mobilize voters. It would appear in cahoots with the same sort of third-party groups that were organized and coordinated with under the Zuckerbucks effort. And the reason that I caveat all of this and I try to be careful in it is because the administration isn't releasing any information about this, hardly any information about the Biden Bucks effort, despite the fact that progressives groups who cheered this on and behind it do put out progress reports on where the administration is. But every agency was supposed to put forth a strategic plan for how they were going to implement this. Very few agencies have released them to the public. There's litigation around trying to unearth them. We know nothing about who the third-party groups are that the administration is coordinating with, on what grounds, and what the coordination actually looks like, besides some emails that have been released via FOIA. And the emails show that the listening sessions that the White House was holding in terms of implementing this thing were populated by overwhelmingly progressive organizations. But what little evidence we do have certainly suggests that this is a comprehensive effort using all of these agencies in myriad ways to try and turn out the cohorts that they interact with, and the cohorts that they interact with overwhelmingly are on the Democrat side. So
well, yeah, anything, I mean, if you have like a ton of contact with the federal government, if you are on a routine basis communicating with the government, you're dependent on the government, then you're the type of voter who's probably going to be a Democrat who's inclined to expand the size of that government.
It's almost an inherent conflict of interest baked into it, even if you assumed that the people working at the agencies were totally apolitical, everything they were doing was above board, and the third-party organizations they were coordinating with all weren't progressive leaning. And those are not assumptions that you can make here, obviously. So imagine if Donald Trump said, I'm going to use the federal government to have a get out the vote effort for marginalized MAGA voters in this country. You can imagine what the uproar would be and how quickly that executive order would not only be killed, but then you'd have an impeachment probably the next day.
They already, remember during the 2020 election, they were accusing him of attempting to steal the election with the Postal Service. Yeah, they'd hit him in a second for exactly what you're talking about. And I do want to remind people that the executive order, it's called the Executive Order on Promoting Access to Voting that the Biden administration put out under Joe Biden's name, of course, March 7th of 2021. This is immediately when he came into office. That they had a presidential executive order ordering all of the agencies to undertake voter registration drives in the course of all of their normal work. They say all of their activity with the public, including agency materials, websites, online forms, social media platforms, and other points of public access. So every touch point that the federal government has with American citizens under the Biden administration, they wanted to implement a get out the vote drive using tax dollars to do it. I mean, how can you read this other than a Democrat vote rigging effort?
And as you said, it's notable that it was in March 2021. They were very cognizant of the fact that they wouldn't necessarily be able to pass the federal legislation that they wanted, which looked like it would be, in effect, a federal takeover of elections, and obviously on huge constitutional problems with that and legal problems associated with that. But this was a workaround and potentially an election swinging workaround because, as you said, there are so many touch points with such large populations of people. And again, this baked-in conflict, if you're dealing with the government, if you're in any way relying on the government, you're going to vote for that government to continue providing you with the support the government's providing you. So it's a disturbing effort, I think, on constitutional grounds. Practically, it's something that could swing the election. And it's not, first of all, oversight-wise, there's been very little ability to unearth anything from the administration. There is a litigation effort. There's a case out of Pennsylvania. 24 state legislators brought it against the Biden administration, saying this is unconstitutional. It violates state laws. It violates the U.S. Constitution as well. The case was dismissed on standing grounds, not on the merits. And supposedly the plaintiffs in that case are planning on appealing to the Supreme Court. There may also be, I'm told, litigation cropping up in other states as well. Hopefully some court will deal with this on the merits and not try to ignore it on technical grounds. But obviously, as a practical matter, we're months out from an election, and this has been implemented and built up for several years now. So you can imagine how significant the impact is. And the fact that the administration is not at all being transparent about it, Democrats are being very quiet about it, I think raises questions about how significant the impact might be.
Yeah, it's very suggestive that they know exactly what they're doing here. Ben Weingarten from RealClear Investigations with very critical reporting. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your time today. To the phones we go. Mark calling in from Chantilly, line 1. Mark, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince, can you hear me all right?
I hear you great, Mark. What's on your mind, sir?
Great. So thanks for listening to your last guest. One of the things that occurred to me is why isn't the Republicans in the Senate or the House or even the RNC taking this executive order to court as a direct violation of the Hatch Act, which prevents federal employees from doing partisan activities in elections?
That's a great question. I imagine the defense that the Biden people are raising, because they're not telling the whole truth here. They'll say something like, "Oh, we're just registering people to vote. We didn't tell them what party to register for. We're just generically registering people to vote." But of course, you heard from Ben Weingarten just a moment ago that that's just pretextual. They make sure to target people who are either dependent on federal services or who are in these very specific regions who they know will be Democrats, because that's the game. That's the game. But you're exactly right.
You can label it nonpartisan, but it doesn't change that it is partisan.
Of course.
I can butter my button sitting in an oven. It doesn't make me a biscuit.
Yeah, totally right. And you get a suit going like this. Maybe the Discovery turns up all of their little communications and texts and emails where they're conspiring together about, oh, this is going to be great for us. I did see a report from a lefty outlet who's concerned that the only federal agencies who've been doing this well include the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is great. Actually, you probably get a bunch of Republicans accidentally Meanwhile, they're angry that the Department of Education hasn't been sending out voter registration forms enough. So what could save us from all of this rigging? Their incompetence. That might actually work out in the end. We'll see. Matt Rosendale, the congressman, joins us next. We'll talk about the government spying on you.